Shalom lekulam and welcome back to another Chain Languages video. My name is Yair and today we'll be focusing on a subject that is personally very interesting to me as a traditional Jew. That is the subject of Judeo languages. A long time ago on this channel, I ran a short series on Jewish languages where I focused on one language per video. I have often found it's better to talk about 3 or more languages in one video, however, so this video will effectively serve as a follow-up on from the original series. When I say Jewish languages or Judeo languages, you probably think first of Hebrew, the holy language of the Jews, and today the modern variant is spoken by somewhere around 9 million people and is the official language of the State of Israel. Many others will think of Yiddish, the language of the Ashkenazi Jews spoken in Hasidic communities throughout the diaspora, or maybe even the Sephardi equivalent, judeo-espanyol or Ladino. Some others might have also considered Aramaic, the language of the Talmud, and the modern variant still spoken by some Iraqi Jews. However, the languages I will be discussing in today's video, I guarantee you most people wouldn't associate with Jewish communities, let alone even knew that they existed. You may have noticed, however, that I've used the term Judeo language over Jewish language. What is the difference? Some people wouldn't make a distinction at all, but the term Judeo language tends to refer to a specifically Jewish version of a language that diverged over the centuries due to isolation in ghettos to the point it became its own distinct language, such as Judeo-German, much more commonly known as Yiddish. A Jewish language, on the other hand, is usually more of a dialect, or rather ethnolect, such as Jewish English or Jewish Russian, in which the language itself is no different, but certain ways of speaking, use of Hebrew and Aramaic vocabulary, and other features make it distinguishable as a, quote, Jewish variety. Speakers of Jewish languages can easily blend into the wider language so as to not expose themselves, whereas this might be more difficult for speakers of specifically Judeo languages. That being said, the languages in this video can be argued by some to be only ethnolects, i.e. Jewish languages. Before we start though, I want to quickly remind everyone again that you can become a channel member by following the link in the corner of the screen now. Thank you to all the people listed here for becoming members. As an additional reminder, if you want to follow me in any other places, here are my accounts that are active across the internet. However, without any further delay, let's begin the video. Yalla, matchilim. The first language we're going to talk about today was once spoken by a Sephardi community right next to Spain, that being Judeo-Portuguese, originally spoken in Portugal at the same time that Ladino was spoken in Spain, before the 1496 expulsion of Jews and Muslims from Portugal led to Judeo-Portuguese speakers migrating to other areas of the world, including the Netherlands, England, and later Brazil. A fun fact related to food is that although fish and chips is a very stereotypical food from the UK, the concept of battered fish was originally brought over by Portuguese Jews, and the first fish and chip shop in London was opened much later in the 1860s by another Jewish immigrant, making fish and chips an originally Jewish dish introduced to the British. Sticking more in line with the language, however, we don't know how many speakers it really has. You see, there are ethnolects today that are often described as Jewish Portuguese and Jewish Brazilian Portuguese, but these are not the same thing as Judeo-Portuguese as far as we can tell. It probably existed for centuries after the expulsion in other communities, but eventually would have gone extinct somewhere between the 18th to 19th centuries due to Judeo-Portuguese assimilating with the wider Portuguese language due to increased education and a desire to try and fit in as to not stick out as Jewish too much. However, it didn't disappear without a trace. As I've already mentioned, Jewish communities in Portugal and Brazil today have their own ethnolects, and on top of that, it is believed that Judeo-Portuguese also influenced the Papiamento and Saramacan Creole languages in the Caribbean. Judeo-Portuguese survived much longer in the diaspora than in Portugal itself, where it probably died as early as the 16th century. Let's look at how Judeo-Portuguese differed from Standard Portuguese. First of all, a few archaicisms were preserved by the Jews. What is agora in Portuguese, meaning now, was originally angora in Judeo-Portuguese. Similarly, the word for the number 2, which is dois in modern Portuguese, is recorded as dus in Judeo-Portuguese. Like many Judeo languages, Judeo-Portuguese used many Hebrew loanwords, some of which can be seen here. What's interesting is the pronunciation shift that occurred for many of the words, such as yeziba instead of yeshiva and keila instead of kehila. I wondered if Judeo-Portuguese speakers might have used Kela to mean synagogue, as many Sephardi Jews refer to the synagogue as a Kahal. However, I found an instance of the Greek-derived term esnoga in the language. One final thing I'd like to show is this interesting instance of Judeo-Portuguese which is present in the Siddur used by the Spanish and Portuguese Sephardi community in London. This page shows 3 different languages: Hebrew, Aramaic, and Judeo-Portuguese, meaning it still has some liturgical function today. This blessing appears in Hebrew on the right and in Judeo-Portuguese on the left, and is asking God to help all the Jews affected by the Inquisition. However, this is all I have for Judeo-Portuguese, so I think we should move on to our next language now. The next language I'd like to discuss was spoken not far away in Morocco, but this isn't Judeo-Darija, also known as Judeo-Moroccan Arabic, but rather a much more rare language, that being Judeo-Amazigh. Judeo-Amazigh was specifically the Judeo variety of the Tashilhit or Shilha Amazigh language, which I've talked about before in this video here. This map here shows the Tashilhit language and the areas where Judeo-Tashilhit was spoken either as a primary or secondary language. Another fun food fact that relates to the Jews of Morocco is the popular North African and Middle Eastern dish shakshuka, which many people are aware originated in Morocco, but many people are not aware that there's a good chance that it was originally created by Jews. The whole concept is very similar to chamin or cholent, depending on what you call it, and the presence of the eggs and absence of meat makes the dish palva, which in Jewish dietary law means that it contains no meat or dairy, allowing it to be a, quote, neutral dish for Shabbat. Judeo-Amazigh still has around 200 speakers today. These people are a mix of first language and second language speakers. The second language make the majority of speakers, and their native language is usually Darija. The speakers live in Israel and France today, however. Although there are still Jews in Morocco, they are concentrated in cities in the north and continue to speak Darija. Due to the high number of Judeo-Darija speakers, Judeo-Amazigh has been influenced by it. One of these influences I could find is apparently the shift from the sh phoneme to sa, or in some cases, the other way around. This is apparently a marker of Jewish speech in Morocco, and is a feature that might be stereotypically exaggerated when imitating Jews, even today in Morocco. Another feature that distinguishes it from non-Jewish varieties of Tashilhit is the shift of q to k, which is apparently a feature of Darija found across all of Morocco. A full chart of consonants and vowels is shown here, and as we can see, q still does exist, so it's likely the shift only occurs in certain words. I was quite surprised to see how, quote, Semitic the consonants look, but of course, Amazigh and Semitic languages are distantly related, so it shouldn't come that too much of a surprise, especially given the influence of Judeo-Darija on this language. Finally, let's take a look at some samples of Judeo-Amazigh. This first sample comes from the Wikipedia page and is an extract from a Pesach Haggadah written in Judeo-Amazigh. I would guess this comes from the Avadim Hayinu B'Mitzrayim section. I think the Hebraization is poorly done, however, so I've transcribed my own version here. The next sample I would imagine is also from the same Haggadah, with a clear translation shown alongside it. Also Pesach related is this handwritten translation of Chad Gadya into Judeo-Amazigh, and the inclusion of the Nikud makes this particularly helpful. The final sample came directly from the Jewish Language Project's page on Judeo-Amazigh, and is actually a demonstration of the southernmost dialect in which certain circumstances change L to N, especially the article l, which means the or and, shown in this example as N. The word anhazan for a rabbi, I highly suspect, comes from the Hebrew word chazan, which traditionally means a cantor in a synagogue, but sometimes the cantor might also be the rabbi. However, these are all the samples I have for Judeo-Amazigh, and more work is being done to record the language before it dies out. With that, I suggest we move on to our final language. The final language I'm going to talk about today still survives in a very small area in Rome, that language being judeo-romanesco, the language of the Jewish community in Rome, originating in the old Jewish ghetto. A fun fact once again relating to food is that the first ever explicit reference to the word pizza is actually in a 14th century glossary of words in the Mishneh Torah, appearing in Hebrew script. I had trouble finding the source, but after contacting the Jewish Language Project, I was provided with a reference. Sadly, however, I could not access it, and the text is expensive, but thankfully they came to my rescue again and provided me with the page. I'll provide the reference in the description, but here is the page. From what I can tell, judeo-romanesco today has around 250 speakers, which doesn't even comprise 10% of Rome's Jewish population, which stands at around 15,000 today. Judeo-romanesco is also the only surviving form of any judeo-italian language, which is a collection of Judeo languages and Jewish ethnolects that were once present across the various city-states of Italy, such as Judeo-Venetian and Jewish Piedmontese. For this reason, of being the only surviving Judeo-Italian language, judeo-romanesco can sometimes be referred to as judeo-Italian, as well as judeo-roman, giudaico-romanesco, italkit, which is just the Hebrew word for Italian, and traditionally the Talkim, or the Italian Jews, actually referred to their local varieties as la'az, though pronounced it in italkit as langaz. More on that soon. In terms of how developed the speech variety is, Judeo-Italian is as linguistically rich as Yiddish. I mean this in terms of it is not just a case of using Hebrew loanwords in standard Italian, but rather grammatical changes have taken place and different pronunciation conventions have developed over the centuries. It is said that there are only 250 speakers of the language today, but some younger Italian Jews are taking an interest in revitalizing the language, which is always good to hear. As someone who speaks basic B1 Italian, I'm also interested in this variety and would like to participate in its revitalization. Judeo-romanesco's phonology is mostly the same as modern standard Italian, however it does include the phoneme h, probably due to Hebrew influence. The original phoneme for the letter het was lost in the Italian liturgical pronunciation of Hebrew, just like in modern Hebrew, becoming identical to chaf. This sound doesn't exist in Italian. However, the most interesting phoneme in my opinion is the letter ein, which was lost in modern Hebrew but is preserved in Italian Hebrew pronunciation, albeit changed. They preserved the pharyngeal ein sound with a nasalized g sound instead. We will look at some examples of that in a second. I want to add that similar to modern Hebrew, the letter thodi is now pronounced as ts. So if we look at some individual words that are derived from Hebrew words with ein, we can see the unique preservation of the phoneme. The word ngasave is used to mean Christians and is derived from Asav, the biblical character that predated Christianity as well over 1,000 years, but in Jewish tradition has been associated with our Christian brothers in comparison to Yaakov, who represents Jews. Ngarele means non-Jews. You can ask Hebrew speakers in the comments what that one means. Mongede is a holiday coming from Moed. Mangode is money, coming from the Hebrew word for coins, ma'ot. And sticking with the theme of Jacob and Esau, Jacob, which is Yaakov in Hebrew, is Yangakov in Judeo-Romanesco. As a quick side note, it's possible that Ashkenazi Hebrew once did a similar thing, although now entirely lost. The evidence for this is a common nickname in Yiddish for the name Yaakov is Yankee. It's proposed that the N comes from an attempted vocalization of ein that may have once been common in Ashkenazi liturgical pronunciation. A common adjective used by Italian Jews is ngashire, which comes from ashir, meaning rich, and is used so rich Italian speakers don't understand that they're being talked about. Judeo-Romanesco also has a unique verb, ngainare, meaning to look at. This comes from the Hebrew noun ein, which, although being the name of the letter, also means eye. This isn't a verb in Hebrew, so is a unique construction in Judeo-Romanesco, built from the Hebrew word. That moves us nicely onto some of the unique verbs that Judeo-Romanesco has developed. One of the reasons this is considered more of a Judeo language than a mere ethnolect is because, like Yiddish, Judeo-Romanesco has incorporated Hebrew vocabulary into Italian grammatical constructions. For example, instead of saying mangiare, the verb achlare from the Hebrew verb lechol is used. Dabrare means to speak from ledaber. The verb meldare means to pray, or to daven for the Jews watching this video. Melda is used in the same way daven is in Yiddish and Jewish English. But the origin is unknown. It's possibly from the Aramaic word meltor, meaning word. There are also some interesting words in judeo-romanesco derived from Hebrew, but with slightly different meanings. Shona Kodesh can refer to Hebrew from Lashon HaKodesh. However, it can also mean judeo-romanesco in some contexts, which is confusing. The word makom, from the Hebrew word makom, is used as a euphemism for toilet, which I personally think is very inventive. Mezzododze refers to a pretty woman, coming from mezuzah. This is because Jews traditionally kiss the mezuzah upon entering a room, and they would like to similarly kiss a woman deemed pretty. This semantic change I would have never come up with. There's also karove, meaning close relatives, from the adjective karov in Hebrew. In some contexts, this same meaning can apply in Hebrew, so it's not too much of a stretch like mezzododde, however. Similar to verbs, there are some nouns that are formed with Italian grammar but Hebrew vocabulary. A good example of this is impachadito, meaning afraid, by replacing the Italian word paura in the word impaurito with pachad, being the Hebrew word for fear. Likewise, chazirute refers to junk and is derived from the Hebrew word for pig, which is chazir. Apparently, a similar word also exists in Yiddish. The phrase fadavari is an imperative command meaning be quiet. However, it's a reverse of its actual meaning, as it comes from the biblical Hebrew word davar, meaning word, and the Italian verb fare, meaning to make or to do. So it basically literally means make a word. But the meaning is instead reversed to mean make no words, i.e. be quiet. Finally, the word malmazal means unlucky, and simply comes from mal in Italian and mazal in Hebrew. I've given lots of lexical examples, but sadly there aren't many physically written samples of modern judeo-romanesco. There is a production company that makes plays in judeo-romanesco, and I will link one of their videos in the description. However, I would like to show this Renaissance inscription of judeo-Italian, specifically judeo-Venetian, written by Rabbi Leon di Modena. It is a homophonous translation in Hebrew and judeo-Italian, meaning all the words sound more or less the same whether you read it in Hebrew or judeo-Italian. The poem is called Chi nasce muor in Italian and Chi nasce mor in Hebrew. The meaning is not quite the same in both languages, however, but I still think this is a very impressive text. However, I've talked about judeo-romanesco in quite a bit of detail now, and I think it's about time we bring this video to a close. Thank you all for watching. I want to give a big special thank you to the Jewish Language Project, also known as jewishlanguages.org, who work very hard to record and preserve Jewish languages and provide information about them. Please go and check them out, go and subscribe to them on YouTube. They have lots of very interesting videos of all sorts of niche Jewish languages that either once existed or still exist and need preserving. Thank you once again to the members who helped make this video possible, and also thank you to everyone else who supports my channel by watching, liking and subscribing. Do you speak any Judeo languages, or even a Jewish variety / ethnolect of your language? I'd love to discuss them in the comments with you all. Additionally, if anyone wants to contact me regarding revitalization of Judeo-Italian, please do feel free, I'd appreciate it too. However, until next time, toda rabba ve yalla bye.